So today we are going to start solving quadratic equations, and specifically today we're going to be doing it by graphing. And so we still need all the stuff we've learned over the last 2 weeks about how do we graph in order to go and graph these. So when solving a quadratic equation, we need the equation in standard form. And so we do want the equation to be set equal to 0 so we can go graph it. If one of those parts is on the wrong side, we can't graph it yet. So move it all to one side equal to 0, then go graph. And so when we're graphing these, the whole idea is that we have the x-intercepts are going to be the solution to these equations. We will learn another method later this week on how to solve these other than graphing. So what does it look like for x-intercepts? So you have a couple of options. One, quadratics can have two unique solutions that are two different numbers that occur. They can be on different sides of the y-axis. They can be on the same side. You can just have two different numbers. And so, or you can have one, and that's going to look like when my quadratic touches the x-axis but doesn't cross it. And then the last one is going to be no real solutions, and a term you'll see in your homework is no integral solutions. And so that means there's not an answer, it's a no real solution. You'll talk about how to deal with these more specifically in Algebra 2, and for those of you who take pre-calculus. But those are going to have no real solution, and that's because they have no x-intercepts. They never cross that x-axis. So let's go ahead and go and look at ways we can solve. We're going to see several different ways. I don't think we're going to get to 9.6. We might. It depends on what next week's schedule looks like. But so you can solve by graphing, factoring, quadratic formula. You'll see using square roots and completing the square, both in Algebra 2. Those aren't things we'll cover in Algebra 1. So there are 5 different ways to solve quadratic equations. We're going to focus at least on the first 2 this week. We'll see what happens next week. So let's go ahead and look at how we deal with these. So first, if I asked you to go graph this, you'd have to find the axis of symmetry and build your table, because this one's not in that vertex format we used last week. So you'd have to go back to the table version. But to start talking about it first, well, in order to find out the answers, we care about where the x-intercepts are. So I have one right here, and I have another one here. So this is the point, -2, 0. And this is the point 5, 0. So when this one is set equal to 0, like it was in the original question, if you solve it by graphing, x would equal -2 or x would equal +5. So I had 2 different answers because I have 2 different x-intercepts this time. So with that, those 2 are my answer for this one, okay? So we're just going to take the x value of those x-intercepts. We're not going to take the y value as part of my solution. So let's go and look at how do we check when we think we have an answer, okay? So first, I'm going to write down my original equation, and then I'm going to go in, and so for this side over here, this is my x equals -2. I'm going to plug in -2 and see, does it equal 0? And over on the other side, I'm going to plug in x equals -5, and we're going to see if it equals 0. And so in this case, this gives me +4 plus 6 minus 10 equals 0. So that's going to give me 10 minus 10. And in this case, this does equal 0. So that one's good to go for -2. So for -5, that's going to give me 25 minus 15 minus 10. Does it equal 0? So I'd have Well, 25 minus 15 is 10 minus 10. And does it equal 0? And the answer is yes. It does equal 0. So that lets me see that both of these are my answers with a check, which helps us a little bit more. Okay, so let's go ahead and go solve this one by graphing. So first thing you're going to have to do is we're going to have to go and graph. Okay. So getting started with graphing, A is 1, B is -2, C is -8. So my axis of symmetry is going to be x equals -2 divided by 2 times my A. So that's the formula for 9.1 that we learned a couple weeks ago. So that's going to give me +2 on the top and +2 on the bottom. So my axis of symmetry is at 1. Okay, so I'm going to draw that in there with a dotted line. This one is going to be facing upwards because my A value is positive. And so with that, obviously it gives me some options of -2 and 4. And so let's go ahead and plug in 1. I'm not going to have a lot of space on here. So if I plug 1 in, that's going to give me 1 squared minus 2 times 1 minus 8. So I have 1 minus 2 minus 8. 1 minus 2 is -1 minus 8, which gives me -9. So I'm going to be really low over here. That's 1, -9. Okay, so let's go ahead. So that's 1. Let's go ahead and plug in 0 because it makes it easier. When I plug in 0, I'm going to have 0 squared minus 2 times 0 minus 8. And so that's going to give me 0 minus 0 minus 8. So I'm at -8 at 0. So I'm going to be close by. And that also means I'm going to be at the same value at +2. Because it's on the exact other side. So I already know I can go and get rid of anything that has a +2 because I'm not at 0 at +2. Okay. So I need to pick another number to plug in. Okay. And so in this case, just because I do have options, it's going to take me a little while to get up. So let's go ahead and plug in, let's plug in -2. And so I'm going to change the color because all this is starting to blend together. So if I plug in x equals -2, because both of them have a -2 on there, so -2 is going to be -2 squared minus 2 times -2 minus 8. So this is +4, and that's a +4 minus 8. And 4, so that's going to be 8 minus 8, which equals 0. So that's a -1. So at -2, I am at 0. Okay, so this was 1, 2, 3 units away from my axis of symmetry. So similarly, I should have something else on the other side. So that would be 1. That's 1, 2, 3 would be my other point. And so I know that this one is -2, 0. So this one, so that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 4, 0. And so for this graph, oops, I curved too soon. Okay, so if I care about where I cross the x-axis, I do cross the x-axis at -2 and +4. So my answer should be A. Okay. So let's go and look at another one. So to get started off with this one, it's not in the right format. So the first thing you have to do is move everything to one side. Okay, so it's easier to move the side that just has one piece. So let's go ahead and move the -9. So I can move -9 by adding it to both sides. Okay, and so when I simplify, that gives me x squared plus 6x plus 9. Okay, so if we go to graph this one, okay, my axis of symmetry is going to be -6 divided by 2 times 1, which would give me -6 over 2, which is -3. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and show you the graph of this one and jump ahead of that table and building it up just because it's going to help us a little bit. So here is the graph, and so you can see the axis of symmetry is at -3, but at -3 I'm at 0, okay? So in this case, my only answer is x equals -3 because I'm touching it, okay? So that last step is always going to be locate the x-intercepts, okay? Here it is out in written form for you. And so if there's one, awesome. Take the one. If there's two, take both of them. If there's none, tell me that, okay? But you do have to have the graphs to support these answers and the work to get the graphs. You can't just give me a graph, okay? So let's go ahead and let's not check by factoring because we're going to cover solving by factoring next week. So with that, just go ahead and plug in -3 to check it. So to plug in, my equation is x squared plus 6x plus 9. I want it to equal 0. If I plug -3 in, does it equal 0? Okay, so that's going to be 9 minus 18 plus 9. And that's going to be -9 plus 9 equals 0. And so that one is 0 equals 0, which works. Which we want it to work. Okay, so let's go ahead and do another one. Okay. So I'm going to give you the graph of this one, and I want you to solve this one by, oops, that's not going to work. So I do want you to go ahead and graph it right quick and tell me which one it is. So it should have been B, and this is what your graph should have looked like. Okay. So we looked at one that had 2 answers, one that had 1 answer. What about if I have more than 1 answer? And so with that, what if I have no real roots? What does this look like? So we want to go ahead and graph one that's, let's go graph it. So my axis of symmetry is going to be x equals -2 divided by 2 times the 1. That's going to be -2 over 2, which equals -1. Okay, so let's go ahead and find that y value. So the y value would be f of -1 would equal -1 squared plus 2 times -1 plus 3, which will equal 1 minus 2 plus 3. Gives me -1 plus 3, and this gives me 2. So I have the point -1, 2 as my vertex. So what direction is this one going to be facing? Okay, is it going to be up, down, left, right? What direction does this quadratic face? Okay, well, it should be up. And so because of that, here's the graph. So my last step was always find my x-intercepts, okay? This one doesn't have any because I never cross the x-axis. So this one has no integral solutions, or there's no real solutions. You'll see both of those phrasings today. And so when I post the answer key tomorrow, you'll see that it brings up this notation. And remember, this means there's no solution. So if there's a circle with a slash through it, it means no solution. So obviously on your quiz, when we have it next week, or your test, you won't be able to use that symbol. And so you would just write out no solution, okay? So let's go ahead and do this one. And let me know what you get. So you should have gotten D because this one is once again facing up. It has no x-intercepts. And so because of that, it does what it did. Okay? So you will be given the option to approximate where they land using decimals. And so if you're like, man, that's not a whole number, that's in between two spots, that's okay. And so you won't always land on exact values. And so you'll be able to show me that with your work. Hey, I really think it looks like it crosses here. And so let me know if you need any help. I am here. Reach out to me. I know this is only 3 examples. I guess we did a few more than 3. But it'll help us go through and find all the pieces. So we're going to do one last one, and then I'm going to let you go. So we're going to do this one from scratch without the use of the online one or the graph just showing up for me. So with this one, first I need to find my axis of symmetry. And so my axis of symmetry is the x equals negative, well, this case it's -5 divided by 2 times 1. So that gives me 5/2. Okay, well, 5/2 is the number 2.5. So it's somewhere in there. Okay, well, that one's not ideal. I don't need to know that vertex value because it's not a whole number. And right now, I care about whole numbers in terms of getting my information. But what I do want to do is I do want to pick things on either side of it to make life a little bit easier, okay? So this is where you'd write your y equals x squared minus 5x plus 4. And over here is your x comma y. Okay. So with that, let's see. Let's try 1. So 1 is a couple over. I'm avoiding those spots really, really close to it. Let's see what happens. And so when I plug in 1, I'd have 1 squared minus 5 times 1 plus 4. And that's going to give me 1 minus 5 plus 4. In this case, that one equals 0. Okay. So, well, that's an important piece of information because I wanted it to... I didn't know that that one was going to be 0. It just kind of worked out that way. But now, so I'm 1.5 units behind the axis of symmetry. So if I go half and then 1 forward, that should be my other point. And in this case, that is 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's see if 4 also works. Okay, so this would give me 4 squared minus 5 times 4 plus 4. So that's going to be 16 minus 20 plus 4, which equals 0. So this is going to give me 4, 0, which we already saw was right. This is more of me just doing a check behind myself. And so I do know that this one was facing up, and so without having found my axis of symmetry, my vertex value, it let me give a sketch because I found the needed pieces. And so the 2 answers are x equals 1 and x equals 4. Those are the only two parts that are the answers that I care about. Remember, your book would put it in notation of 1, 4. Okay, curly brackets, not straight brackets. So let me know if you have any questions. I'm around, office hours Wednesday. Let me know if you need anything.